It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. And we're on the line this morning with Mark Shulman. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Mark has come up with Show Me History. These are new graphic novel biographies of famous people, and he's out with the first two of these, Walt Disney and Susan B. Anthony. Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
It's good to have you with us here today, and what a fantastic idea. You know, you go through the bookstores now, and the graphic novels that the kids are reading now, and the adults as well, because they're so good, they really have become a genre all of their own, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that you can now get stories that are much more nuanced and much more filled with fact than they used to be has opened this whole category up much more.
Now, you've written about 150, even more, kids' books. What brought you to this concept and this particular, in these first two subjects, Walt Disney and Susan B. Anthony? What brought you here to this point?
Honestly, I'm always interested in telling a good story. Nonfiction, I've read a lot of nonfiction. That's both for younger kids, for middle school level, a lot of boy interest, and a lot of humor. And all of those come together really nicely. Then I have my picture book. So I've already got an experience with bringing illustrations into the story. So it was a natural fit for me. And as far as these history stories go, the publisher was interested in finding a format that would be able to create nonfiction biographies. And with that alone, my writing partner, Jim Buckley, and I put together this whole program. So we not only write the stories, but we also get the illustrators in, and we manage all the art straight through to the final color.
Now, were you a big comic book kid growing up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was always, the world was divided into the DC kids and the Marvel kids.
Yep. Which one were you?
I was a DC kid because that was the house I brought up in. So it was all Superman and Batman. But I had a friend who, he was a Spider-Man Hulk friend, and but we were able to get over our differences. I loved them all. It's one of those days when you could get your friend and you could trade 30 comics, and all you did was sit there all day long and go through them.
Yeah, my best friend growing up, the drugstore down up the street, it carried all the comic books, and they knew when the newest load came in, pull one out for him in each series, because he was money. I mean, he was money to them. All right, so I'm looking at the one with Walt Disney right now. And one of the things that stands out to me is we think of comics and we think of books of this nature as being for little kids. This is not necessarily little kid stuff, is it?
Not at all. In fact, any adult reading this would get a lot of information, and it wouldn't feel like such a drag to learn it. No, and for instance, in this one, Walt goes bankrupt a number of times. He tries to break a strike for the animators when they're looking for a fair wage. And when he loses the strike, he testifies at the House Un-American Activities Committee that they're all communists. So, and names. It is not just for kids by any means.
No, not by any means. And, I'm on that particular page, and it, like many of the other pages in the book, depict Walt Disney smoking, which in today's, you couldn't see that on TV, could you?
Not at all. But, he died of lung cancer, and it shouldn't be a surprise. He's just covered in smoke throughout this story. And the fact is that he, a lot of the things that people did that were normal not very long ago stand out. And so when you put them back into a story like this, you start to wonder whether you should or not. But that's what they did. Yeah.
So you have to construct a story around Walt Disney in this case, and around some of the other characters, Martin Luther King Jr., Amelia Earhart, Ben Franklin, some of those others that are just icons of history. When you're putting this story together and you're deciding, okay, this is important to the story, I'm keeping it in, this is not something that, I really feel will be beneficial to the book. Talk about that process and how you want to construct the narrative, because it is. You really have to construct it just as you would any other story.
Oh, absolutely. we think we know the story of somebody's life, and then we realize we really only have the touch points that come up, the lily pads. But there's so much more underneath. And the secret is to be a storyteller and to be a tour guide who's showing them not just the highlights, but things that are of interest to you. And what I find when I'm reading these books is fascinating. You know, I learned that Susan B. Anthony never had a house. She lived for 60 years going around being an agitator for rights, but never had a home because she was always on the road. That stands out, and you can find ways of using that to tell her story. You know, she has a trunk that she drags behind her all the time. Boom, boom, boom. Big, heavy trunk. There turns out there was a real one. But she is somebody who from beginning to end, is always on the move. And there's a way to use that to kind of move the story along, which is what happens.
It's interesting. I mean, Susan B. Anthony, you know, very seldom does she have a smile on her face in her depiction of the story of Susan B. Anthony in your book. And you think about the way that people reacted to the message that she had. Her message today sounds like, well, of course, to us in today's day and age, but you see the people reacting to her in that day and the stereotypes of what women were supposed to be back in that day and age, they come soaring through, and they're really important, especially in today's culture, today's environment, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, she went and spoke in front of the Senate a number of times just to say, you know, women should have a vote. And they laughed her out of the place. They didn't just tell her not to, you know, they thank you very much. You know, they said, so you'd prefer a law where the wives wear trousers and the men wear petticoats? That's actually in the congressional record. And so you get the when you see that, when you're confronted with it, you kind of realize that how much effort she put into this was superhuman. She was up against not only, and before the women's right to vote, she was strongly encouraging, worked very hard for the abolition movement to get freed slaves the vote themselves, and before that, temperance. You know, so if you think about someone whose focus is don't drink, free slaves, get women to vote, there wasn't a lot of time for her to smile, but we did what we could.
The graphic novel format, the whole genre, really seems tailor-made for today's kids. And so it really brings up the question of how were you able to identify exactly what you wanted to put into one of these graphic novels? What were the kids looking for in your mind?
You know, there are things have to be in a story. If it's Ben Franklin, I knew he has to fly the kite, and I knew that he has to do the go to Paris, and I know that he has to get the Revolutionary War underway. But in between that, you can learn things about somebody who that really make them more real as people, because they become so freeze-dried over history. George Washington, a book I just finished, seems to be this guy who's always so stoic. He had a terrible temper. He swore all the time, and he had a lot of problems with getting people to get in line behind him for that. Only when he stopped talking did they listen. And so when you find that out about him, you realize that's a lot more interesting than the wooden character that they brought out in front of us to take a look at. This is somebody who had a lot of flaws and a lot of conflict in his life.
And making it appealing to kids through the artwork is fantastic. You got some big time artists on this, didn't you?
Yeah, we were lucky. We got Kelly Tyndall is magnificent, and he really has a great way with faces. They're very expressive. Otis Frampton, who did the Disney book, has a style that's almost out of movie storyboards. And but we keep it light, and it's kept in a way that you don't feel as if you're too deep into realism, so that something can happen that you're not expecting in the middle of the if there's an exchange, for instance, in the Ben Franklin book between France and England, and it's done in text, or the Hamilton duel with Burr, the same thing, using modern stuff, phone screens or other ways, so that you can just kind of break up the narrative of the story. And in all cases, trying to get the story out the best way you can in a way that will stand out. and kids have responded really well.
I'm sure that you learned about each of these people that you give the treatment to. You learned some things that you didn't even know, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, with Susan B. Anthony, for instance, it turns out that they had a women's temperance society that they set up in Rochester, where I grew up. And there were two temperance societies. This was the one, the women's was the one that was open to all parties. So a bunch of men decided to join the Women's Temperance Union, enough to sway the vote so that they became the heads of it. They voted themselves the president of the Women's Society, and then turned around and changed the name to the Men's Temperance Society and kicked all the women out.
Yes.
That really happened.
You know, as you said that, I opened to right on that page where the officers vote to remove Mrs. Stanton and Miss Anthony as our leaders. And Susan B. Anthony reacts, but why we oughta.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
and what
so
can you, but you think that has to be fake. You wouldn't possibly realize that. But in fact, that's what happened. These guys were so threatened by a competing temperance society that they had to infiltrate it.
Mark Shulman has been our guest. Show Me History, a new series of books kids are going to love, so are adults. And they're graphic novels that are just so much fun and so entertaining. So, Mark, where are we going to learn more about this, and how can we get our hands on them? Well,
the showmehistory.com website is a location that has the various books and materials, video, and so on for the books. They're available anywhere in the world of now that the bookstores are mostly closed. If you can get to a real bookstore, please do. And if not, you can order one.
There you go. There you go. It's great stuff. Mark, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Todd.
Have a great one.
Have
a great one.